second time, and I call the honourable member for Indi.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and congratulations on your appointment as Deputy Speaker.
Thank you.
It's lovely to have you here. In support of the Appropriation Bill 2016 and 17, I'd like to pay particular attention to the impacts on rural and regional Australia. And in opening my comments, I'd also like to welcome to Parliament and to this chamber two wonderful women from my electorate, to Francine and to Polly. Thanks for coming, thanks for your work, and I really, really appreciate your contribution to my office as volunteers, but particularly the work you do in your own communities to make them a safe place. So thank you for being here. Tonight, I want to put a challenge to the government. I want to put a challenge to the Prime Minister. During the campaign, he was very proud and very loud in him telling the people of Australia that the Liberal and the National Party have a plan for jobs and growth. And I'm really, really pleased to hear it. But the bit of the plan that really confuses me is when I went through all the publicity and I read the detail really closely, I said, but where's the plan for rural and regional Australia in the plan for jobs and growth? And as I got further into it in my own electorate of Indi during the campaign, there was a National Party candidate standing, and I went to his material to see what he was standing for. What was the National Party saying about jobs and growth in rural and regional Australia? And it almost made me cry with frustration, Mr Deputy Speaker. There was nothing there about rural and regional Australia. There was nothing there. I couldn't find the name mentioned once. No regional development plan. No sense of what the vision for Australia was in terms of rural and regional Australia. So the National Party had a statement that they've got our plan for a strong new economy. And I went inside that on the webpage and had a really good look. And again, there was not a single mention of rural and regional Australia in their subsections about jobs or families. And it wasn't that they were talking about the city either. It was this nondescript sense of all Australia being the same. There was some sense that by just using the words, things would work. And all of us know that that's not the case for rural and regional Australia. There was one thing in the National Party webpage that I looked at. It was called Supporting Australia Farmers and Exporters. And I went in there and had a closer look, and I thought, well, maybe here's where I'll find about regional development. But no, it wasn't there. It was about agriculture, which I have to say I'm really pleased to see. But there was no sense at all that agriculture exists within the context of a community, it exists within a context of small business, that it exists within a context of education and all the services we need. It just wasn't there. And similar with small business, I went in there and thought, well, what's the government going to do about small business in rural and regional Australia? Zilch, nada, nothing. So in my role tonight, as a member for rural and regional Australia, I want to really speak up for us, and I want to talk about the role of the budget as one of the key policy documents for this government to pay attention to rural and regional Australia. And as taxpayers in rural and regional Australia, we want to see our dollars coming back to us, not just as trickle down or by the way. We want to see services come to our community that address our needs, that are specifically designed for the group of people who live in the country, because we all know, as you do, Mr Deputy Speaker, that it's different to the city. And what I want to say tonight is, sadly, when I see the budget papers, I see no vision for rural Australia. I see this sense that one size, I think there's an assumption that one size will fit everything. There's an assumption that trickle down might work. And there's maybe even an assumption that a rising tide might lift all boats. But if we know anything about rural and regional Australia, we know it just doesn't happen. And what I wanted to say tonight was that it's not that the government doesn't know how to do it. If we look closely at some of the government's other programs, we can see that they do know how to plan and they do know how to do sectorial planning. And one of the really good examples of this is the Northern Australian Plan. And it shows clearly that the government, when it puts its mind to it, can actually do a whole-of-region, integrated, strategic, long-term, sustainable development. I love reading the Northern Australian Plan, but every time I see it, I go, yeah, but what about the rest of us? What about North East Victoria? What about Southern New South Wales? What about a strategic approach to how our community is going to reach its potential? And the second example I see when I read the government's papers about its ability to plan, and this, again, I just love this example, it's the work that the government has done on developing its National Defence Plan. I looked at that document and I thought, here are the planners. And I just love listening to the Prime Minister speak about it. The Prime Minister said, we want to use defence industries to grow innovation, to grow creativity, to grow jobs, to grow our exports. And we'll wrap it all together around a 20-year, multi-million-dollar defence plan. And I go, great. But why can't we take that logic and that thinking to rural and regional Australia? Why can't we take that thinking to agriculture and all the surrounding bits of agribusiness? Why can't we have our budget papers do that sort of thinking for us? So that's my major point that I want to make tonight. I want to really set on the agenda that over the next 3 years, that's what I'm going to be working with the government about, is putting rural and regional Australia at the front. And I'm going to be saying to the government, let's talk about infrastructure. Let's talk about how the money is invested in rural and regional Australia to do what we need to do. And I'm going to come back and talk about some of the things about the National Stronger Region in a minute, because that's, well, perhaps I'll do it now, that's where the main money at the moment is spent. And I don't know about you, Mr Deputy Speaker, but I looked at the National Regional Funding Program, and, you know, it's good with what it does, but clearly there's not nearly enough money there. The actual applications far outweigh the ability of the government to fund it. So what you get caught is this terrible competitive tension of politics, of demand, of a good submission. And it's not actually based on need. And it's not actually based on a strategic approach to advance the national economy. So I know the Minister is going to be looking at that program and come up with something different. But I'm saying you can't actually have a plan for spending if you haven't got a national vision. It's not much good having, we'll give this money for this and give this money for that, if it doesn't actually fit into a whole. So I think that whole budget process just lacks that vision. It lacks a clarity of what are we trying to achieve. And so when I'm talking about this, I go and look at the budget papers and I say, well, where could we get some better input into this? And my research has showed me that there's a process in the Cabinet submission process, and I'll just briefly read this into Hansard. A Cabinet submission that has a positive or negative impact on Australians' regions must include a Regional Australia Impact Statement, an RAIS, and the role of the RAIS is to provide a comprehensive and accurate assessment of the effects, positive or negative, that a policy proposal will have on regional Australia. And the RAIS helps to ensure that regional impacts are made visible to Cabinet Ministers to inform their decision-making. And when the regional impacts of the policy proposal are significant, they should be analysed by the body of the Cabinet submission and summarised in the RAIS, including references to the relevant section of the Cabinet submission. So it's there. The idea is there, but I think it fails in its implementation. And to follow this through a little bit, there was a question asked in Senate estimates in 2015 of the Attorney-General, Senator Brandis, and he was asked if there was a Cabinet impact statement prepared by a certain program. In this case, it was the Australia Council. And he said, no, that's not the way the budget process works. So this suggests to me that regional impact statements may be a part of Cabinet process, but they're not part of budget process. So that's a problem. So Cabinet maybe is thinking about rural and regional Australia, but when we come to do the budget, it's not there. So what's the answer to this? What hope have we got to actually get the budget process thinking about those of us who live in the regions, those who live in rural and those who live in more isolated areas? So it seemed to me that one of the things we could do was call on the government to have these budget impact statements made public twice a year with the budget and also with the mid-year economic report. So it was in 2014 I introduced into Parliament a private members bill calling on the government to do this. And it was the Charter of Budget Honesty Regional Impact Statement Bill. And I think I'm going to have to reintroduce it in this session of Parliament, because clearly, in all the words of the Prime Minister, in all the words of the Minister, in all the words of the whole election campaign, there was no sense at all that anybody in the government actually gets that rural and regional Australia is different to the cities. And we've actually got to design our policy, our funding processes to meet the needs. But it's not enough just to do the design and to do the funding, because I know you know, Mr Deputy Speaker, that government can put a whole lot of money into something that makes absolutely no difference at all. What we've actually got to do is say, here's the intended outcomes that we want. And then we've got to measure the outcomes and go, yes, here's the planning, here's the budget, here's the delivery mechanism, and here's the outcomes we want. And here, really importantly, is the review mechanism. So we can go back and say, yep, that money worked, we've got that, we've solved that problem, but next time we've got to do X, Y, Z. And I just don't see that process when government makes its budget submissions. So, of course, we don't get the outcome we want because it's not actually designed into the process that we're looking for. So, in bringing my comments to a close tonight, I put the challenge up there not only to the public service that advises the government, PM&C, to the Ag Department, to the Department of Regional Development, to the Minister for Infrastructure, but to the whole of the Parliament. We should be saying, here's the outcome we want. We shouldn't just be saying, here's money to be spent. And with the outcome we want, we need to match it against our vision of what we're trying to achieve for the nation. So, in bringing my comments to a close, I just want to put on record my enormous disappointment in the National Stronger Regions program and its failure to fund major infrastructure in my electorate. And I wonder where and how the money is going to come from without a commitment by the government to actually fund infrastructure in regional Australia. So to the Wodonga Council, their Barranduda Field Sporting Complex, you know, it's a great initiative, it's a great idea and it really needs to be funded. For the Mount Buller, Mount Sterling Water Storage Project, again, really important infrastructure, really needs to be funded. To the Tourism Links project that's coming, that links Mount Buller Resort, Mansfield and the Alpine National Parks, really important infrastructure, must be funded. To the Murray, to the Wangaratta Council, to their Wangaratta Aquatics Plan. The plan is to fund an aquatic centre in Wangaratta that creates a regional centre of excellence around swimming for all North East Victoria. Obviously needed, it's well supported. It can't be done by the local council, we just don't have the money, but how can it be done nationally? How can we get the funding in the system to do the infrastructure we need? And I can only see it happening by government making a commitment to actually do for rural and regional Australia what needs to be done. So in absolute closing of this whole, or not closing tonight, but actually setting up an agenda for my work in the next 3 years, I call on the government to actually stand up for rural and regional Australia, and particularly for the National Party. For the National Party to do something about regional policy. Like, how can they have a web page that doesn't talk about regional Australia? How can they have a web page that doesn't talk about regional education? How can they have a web page that doesn't talk about regional health? How can they have a web page that actually doesn't talk about how it all comes together? Like, it is so lacking. So to my National Party colleagues in particular, have courage, have a vision, develop some policies, have some deliverables, and then work on some outcomes. And my hope is that, you know, in 50 years' time, when we're actually having this discussion, we can look back, because what we've actually got is a balanced development agenda in Australia. And we've ended this huge investment in the infrastructure of the cities, and we've said, oh, well, as a nation, we've got a lot of country, we need to have some decentralisation, some large regional hubs, we need really good transport linking them, we need really good internet connecting us up, we need really good health facilities, education facilities, quality first-class facilities, and they happen to be in the country. So I'm hoping that my speech tonight is the beginning of that sense of turning around the idea that all Australia is an urban fringe, and that's the jobs and growth plan is for the urbanites. We need it for the whole country. So thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight, and I'll look forward to coming to this place often and developing these ideas further.
Thank the Honourable